Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. Well, Timber Hawkeye was on the show. That was great. I really appreciated him on the show. I've never talked to a Buddhist before, and this is the first time you've talked to a Buddhist?
I think I've talked to Buddhists before, but not really in depth, like with the question. So for me, it was, and obviously he's a Buddhist monk, so that gives it another level. I mean, it's one thing to be Buddhist, it's another to be a Buddhist monk. That shows a level of commitment.
Yeah, he's kind of known for his book, The Buddhist Boot Camp,
Boot
which was
Camp,
a series of emails that he did between back and forth with his friends, and it just became this like bestseller.
Yeah,
turned into a podcast. But I don't know. I talked to a guy like that, and he would probably get mad at me for saying this, but then you always feel like, I'm not as enlightened as him.
Right.
He'd be like, just be. Just don't
right.
worry about that.
We all have a path to walk and walk your path, right? And we talked about that in the show. So no, I thought it was great, and I always think it's good to talk to people that you don't normally run into in your life, right? So because how else do we get perspective? How else do we learn? How else do we grow unless we're engaging with people that do think differently than us or have different perspectives? So I was really appreciative of his time today and thought it was really cool just to get a different perspective.
Yeah, and it was validating for me, at least personally, because a lot of the stuff that I've kind of morphed into as I started teaching and trying to practice my own life, it's kind of in line with what he was saying, like not chasing that true north, trying to identify what you stand for,
right?
Stop being against things and work on what are you for. And I know that's something you and I are really passionate about. And so he really reinforced that message, and that was my big takeaway from this conversations. I really enjoyed it.
Totally.
All right. Anything you want to add about that?
No, it's just a great episode. I think listeners will get a lot out of it.
Value packed.
Yeah.
Hey, go check out nextlevelmethod.com, guys. The community continues to grow. I'm watching on YouTube. I noticed the views keep going up. We need your support. Subscribe, follow us on your favorite podcast application. Go to YouTube, subscribe there. Let us know what you think about the show. Reach out to us. Go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more. Learn more about the events that we got coming up in the next year, 2022, and the application that you can download on your phone and become part of our community. So let's get on with this great conversation with Timber Hawkeye here on Next Level Method. Well, Timber, I'm so excited to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having a wonderful platform. Appreciate you. I
listened to your latest episode on your podcast talking about composure. That's something I talk about a lot, about being a composer. Matt's heard me talk about being, I'm always trying to be the composed force in what I consider a chaotic situation, right? And I think if that's my foundation, then everything else kind of flows from that. What do you think about when you hear me say that, being the composed force in a chaotic situation?
Well, the alternative would be being part of the problem, adding fuel to the fire. And you're just going, okay, let's calm down and let's not make a bad situation worse. Let's just assess and find a solution, which you can more easily do when you're well composed.
And I love how you said in your podcast that composure is kind of the root of compassion, right? Like to get to the compassionate side, you gotta be composed first. That was like I was driving and I was like, yes, absolutely. I love that. So
yeah, because many of the things that we witness in the world that we consider, hurtful, painful, horrible, torturous, any horrible thing that we witness, it often makes us really angry. And anger is a really powerful tool that says, hey, something is off. But if we don't compose ourselves and respond from a place of compassion, but rather react from a place of anger, then we're adding to the hurt.
Absolutely.
Whereas if we are composed, then we can respond with compassion. And that's why I mentioned it was the root of compassion.
Yeah.
We've got to get to that really calm place first, because otherwise, I gave a talk and I held up pictures of people's faces and they were all mid-scream, just kind of yelling, screaming. And I asked the audience, do you know who these people are in the pictures? And they were all pictures of peace activists. but they weren't peaceful. Right. So that's the idea of composure is if we are well composed, we will be heard and people will be more open to listening to what we have to say.
Yeah. I think for me, it's like a daily, it's an intentional thing, right? It's something I have to do like intentionally almost by second, right? It's all the time, but to me, it's everything. It's the foundation that leads to all this other stuff. Anyway, I love it.
Yeah, you're right. It's a moment by moment fork in the road. I can respond or I can react. And the more often we choose one path, the easier it becomes to choose that again in the future. Whereas if left unchecked, then we would just proceed on autopilot, reacting to everything around us, not well composed.
Yeah. And realizing that we're always at a choice is so empowering to me. Like just knowing that at every moment we're one decision away from doing something radically good or bad, right?
Yeah.
And that's very powerful when I think about that.
I would refrain from good or bad, but more so it's either detrimental to our well-being or beneficial to our well-being.
Yeah.
Either way, you said it's a choice, but even not making a choice is a choice, so we're constantly actively participating in our well-being or in our suffering. Either way, we are active participants.
I'm curious about how we get there, right? I'm curious to see how you do it. What are some of the tactics, how we can get ourselves in that kind of composed, peaceful state. But I think we probably have to know the difference between feelings and emotions, right? I think I certainly conflate the two or confuse the two, right? I mean, what is the difference between a feeling and an emotion in your mind?
Well, I was taught that a feeling lasts between 45 seconds and a minute and a half. And we all experience multiple feelings throughout the day. And sometimes we go from anger to joyous to sad to miserable to ecstatic to laughing and then that's perfectly natural. That's just how feelings come and go. And once we move on from one feeling to the next, that's a very healthy way to go through our feelings. Whereas an emotion starts out as a feeling, but instead of only lasting 45 seconds to a minute and a half and then moving on to the next, we get stuck. And we get stuck by creating a narrative around the feeling. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be feeling this. That person shouldn't be doing that. It's the world versus my view of how it should be. And then we create a narrative. So something that may upset us, and instead of moving on to the next thing, we create a narrative, and that way we can still be angry about it 15, 20 years later. So in a nutshell, emotional maturity means not being upset today by something that upset you yesterday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let it upset you again today, no problem. But don't carry it with you from day to day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm always curious. I love the backstories of how. So obviously today we're sitting here, and you're very composed, and you look very monk-like, if I can say that. Is that a thing, monk-like? Not that you are a monk, but and you've written books. You've got a podcast. The Buddhist Boot Camp was one of your books, and you may have others here. But the thing, you didn't start here, right?
No,
you weren't born with this understanding, this enlightenment's the right way to put it. So you weren't born enlightened, according to your own biography or your own interviews that I was reading. So kind of at what point did you, I guess, kind of not dip your toe in, maybe just jump out of the airplane, but at what point did you where was that threshold where you went, this isn't, what I thought it was, or whatever the case may be, and I guess what was that catalyst?
There were many points.
Okay.
Yeah, there were many points, and I am actually a monk.
Okay.
By definition of I have taken the monastic vows.
Oh, okay.
And not to say, some would argue if I don't live at the monastery anymore, then I'm no longer a monk. But I've seen many people at the monasteries who don't live by the monastic vows. So
right.
to quote Tyler Durden, sticking feathers up your butt does not make you a chicken. So it's not about the robes or not wearing the robes. It's about living the monastic vows every day. And for me, you're right, I wasn't born into this life. So that did take and does take a lot of deliberate intention to rewire some of my old, deeply rooted habits. And, there were many, many turning points in my life where I had to hit the pause button and kind of reflect on what I'm doing and ask, why am I doing this? And that could be working a full-time job in corporate America, making lots of money, driving the sports car, living in the condo, and going, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. And I realized, again, to quote Tyler Durden, many of us are working jobs we hate so we can buy stuff we don't need to impress people we don't like. Mm-hmm. And that was like a really big light bulb that just went off going, I'm trying to impress people who often are not impressed by much, and even if they are, it's very momentary. And are those the people I really want in my life? So I had to just kind of hit pause and go, what do I want? And it was a question I I don't think I'd asked myself before. It was always trying to please other people. And it wasn't about pleasing, and it wasn't about finding joy, but how am I contributing to my own suffering? Can I stop doing that first?
Right.
And by eliminating the very causes of suffering, I found joy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd like to dive deeper into what you just said. So, in your experience and through what you've learned, what is causing suffering? Because I think I see that widespread just in general, and maybe that's my projection into the world. But what what?
It's a very simple answer, actually.
Perfect, great.
What causes internal conflict?
Okay.
And what I mean by that, if we look at suffering, what is the opposite? Well, it's happiness, meaning, and I don't just mean joy, momentary feeling of happiness. I mean true contentment of just joyous being. And Gandhi said that happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are all in alignment. They're all in harmony. And so when they're not in alignment, when they're not in harmony, you're creating internal conflict. You're fighting within yourself. You're thinking one thing and doing another. You want to do something, but you're doing something else out of a sense of obligation, cultural, social, familial, any insecurities, all of that stuff that creates conflict where we are not being our true selves. That creates a lot of suffering. And when we don't deal with it, when we don't heal from it, it comes out sideways. It comes out as anger, jealousy, toxic relationships, just misery, just compounding. And we try to escape that with drugs, sex, alcohol, anything to try other than to hit the pause button and go, what if I eliminated the internal conflict? What if I actually lived in harmony? Well, in harmony with what? I think with taking, again, that pause and saying, what are my values? And am I living in line with them? Because we go through life not questioning it. Companies are very quick to, on their website to say, here are our values, here's our mission statement, here's our vision statement. And we as society, hold them accountable to live in line with their values, with their mission statement. Because when they don't, we say, hey, nothing wrong with doing what you're doing, but you said you wouldn't. So if you just didn't say you wouldn't, then you would be okay. But you're saying one thing and doing another. So we call them on being hypocrites, on being incongruent. But what if each of us had a website and in it we wrote, here are my values. Here's my mission statement, my vision statement. And then like we said earlier, every moment before we're about to drink, before we're about to eat, before we're about to watch something, read something, say something, we ask ourselves, is what I'm about to think, say, or do in line with my values? And if it's not, don't do it. Because the moment you do it, you're creating conflict. So I said it was a simple answer, but I don't know if I simplified it or overcomplicated it.
I think it makes sense. I love everything you say, and I agree 100%. I'm asking both of you this. How it always seems difficult to me to sit down and really kind of it's a lot of work to define what I truly am and what I truly stand for. Why is it so difficult? And maybe, am I the only one that's difficult for? It just seems like it gets really muddy and cloudy when I really want to sit down and try to define. I think on the surface, I could say this is what I stand for. And maybe I overcomplicate it, but I've always found when I do that work and I go, what is it that I want? We had that conversation before. It's easy to say what I don't want, but it's hard to say what I
And that's
really
exactly
want.
where I'm getting to is the moment you sense something within you and you're like, I'm against this and I'm against that and that doesn't feel right. That's a really good indicator that says, okay, that's what I'm against. So what am I for?
Right.
It's Mother Teresa saying, if you invite me to an anti-war rally, I won't go.
Right.
But if you invite me to a pro-peace rally, I will be there. So when trying to figure out what am I for, then, you may have to look at, well, what am I against? And then decide, okay, that points me in the right direction, but I don't want to live my life fighting.
Right.
I don't want it to be a fight with the world. I want my life to be my message. And the message is, here's what I'm for, not what I'm against.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, so
totally.
promote what you love instead of bashing what
Exactly.
you hate.
And
Yeah, so
totally
go through
110%.
your online posts. You know,
Right.
what have you been bashing? What have you
Right.
just what can you promote instead? And that way you're giving a lot more energy to what you want, what you stand for, rather than what you're against.
Yeah, it's playing in it for your strengths, right?
And I think being in integrity with truly being pro that thing versus masking it with, well, I'm for, like, I've got friends that are for health freedom, but they're really anti-vaccine, right? And I don't want, I'm not trying to get into that debate, but I'm just saying, but they're kind of masking it with what versus truly being health freedom globally, health freedom everything. It's no, really they're just anti-vaccine. So I think it's being incongruency, isn't it? With, I mean, that again would create internal conflict. What am I truly for? Not what am I against, so that I'm for something else, but what am I truly for?
Well, the conflict there, the internal, is if we tell ourselves, well, I want to be a peaceful person.
Right.
I want to be kind. I want to be generous. I want to be loving. But if I'm living my life going, I'm anti this, I'm anti that, then I'm not peaceful. I'm not
Right.
kind. I'm not generous. I'm not loving. That's the conflict. The details, whether we're talking about, oh, I'm against animal cruelty, which means I'm for, animal rights. It's like, okay, great. That's just the details.
Right.
Do your actions convey that?
Right.
Because when I travel, for example, to give book talks all over the country and Australia, Canada, the UK, I couch surf. I sleep on people's couches and stay with them. And sometimes I don't know anything about them ahead of time. And sometimes we exchange some emails. And I remember one time staying with someone who on paper you would think I'd get along with very well. And because he was into yoga and meditation and spirituality and organic and all of that. And that's great. But when I got there, it became very clear that while my life is my message and I make my choices when I go to the store, when I order at a restaurant, whatever it is, he on paper shared the same values as I, but his way in the world was very much anti. He hated meat eaters and people who drove cars that weren't electric cars, and he was writing and really just and telling people what they should and shouldn't eat. And yet in his bathroom, his toothpaste was tested on animals, so
Right.
we're very quick to tell other people what to do rather than reflect going, am I living in line with my values?
Right. And being just, I totally agree. And I struggle with that, myself, and just being incongruency with that, with that in my own life, realizing that the best way I guess in my estimation, the best way I can do good in the world is if I'm truly in alignment with those things that I espouse to be in alignment with, right? So literally, if I truly believe in something, am I doing anything about it, or am I just sitting on the couch watching Netflix, right? And there's nothing wrong with watching. I mean, I don't think I watch Netflix, often, but am I also doing things that are adding what I believe to be value into the world, right?
And again, the incongruence would be if you're on a platform talking about how much you don't like violence and you want to end violence and all of that, and then you sit on your couch watching violent movies on Netflix, then there's incongruence. That's the thing. So it's not about so much doing good in the world. Just like, let's take a step back and just let's not contribute to the harm. Let's not be part of the problem. Just start there. And I don't like the Buddhist invitation to do no harm. It's impossible. But can we do less harm? And the moment I switched it from do no harm to do less harm, I was invited to think about the ripple effects of all of my decisions and go, how can I minimize the harm that I'm causing? Not eliminate, minimize. And then I have purpose, I have drive, I have mission, motivation. I mean, you name it. Every moment is purpose-filled. And I think that, in addition to being incongruent, is a really abundant, full life.
Go ahead.
Well, and I wanted to ask about that a little bit. So I have never met a Buddhist monk that I can remember. So thank you for allowing me to spend this time with you. What does a Buddhist monk do? Or what do you do, I should say. What do you do as a Buddhist monk? That's probably a better way to frame that question.
Well, there are 800 different schools of Buddhism, so I definitely cannot speak on behalf of all of them, and many of them differ quite greatly, especially when it comes to what monks and priests do or don't do. In Zen Buddhism, for example, priests can get married, they can have children, the whole works. But in some sects, if you're a monk, then you're celibate and you just spend your days in silence. So there's no one answer I can give you. I can tell you that the monastic vows are, of course, for if you're a monk, you've taken the monastic vows. Kind of like if you're married, you've taken marriage vows. Except
right.
this wedding is not to another person so much as either to a higher power, whether it's outside of you or within, and your life is committed to living in line with those vows. So we talked about values because I'm not out there telling people everyone needs to become a monk and and take monastic vows, but I'm saying everyone can benefit from figuring out what their values are and live in line with those. Just as I live in line with my vows, and someone who is married may or may not. And yes, you can choose to live in a monastery, but you don't have to. The idea is commitment to the vows. And I mean, I'm not going to necessarily take you through the vows, but in a nutshell, it's about reducing the harm in the world through my thoughts, words, and actions.
And how does that, I was kind of curious, just literally, how does that show up? So I know you're an author, and it sounds like you travel and talk about your book, but on a day-to-day basis, kind of what's kind of some of the stuff that you're tactically, and when I say tactically, actually, like, you're just returning emails, or I mean, what's going on? That I'm just curious what a monk does, I guess, throughout the day that doesn't live in a monastery, obviously.
Either way, the intention and the idea, and what I typically do is I study, and my field I study not just religion, but what people believe, and simultaneously psychology, why we believe what we do, because that's the juicy part. It's not necessarily what prejudices do you have, but where did you pick them up? And more importantly, why are you still carrying them? And so my life, when I took the vows, it was really much just a drop down on the knees saying, hey, I want to be of service. Use me as you see fit, universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. And it's just allowing every opportunity to go, can I be of service here? Who am I in relation to what is happening in front of me right now, to what is happening in the world? Who am I in relation to that? And then always making a commitment to acknowledge that within me, yes, there's ego, which is completely self-centered and only concerned with itself. And then there is, call it, the God within, the Buddha within, the wise guru within. You mentioned earlier enlightened. And one of the things that my teacher said that I love is that there are no enlightened beings. There's only enlightened activity. So the people we perceive to be enlightened, whether it be the Dalai Lama, the Buddha, Jesus, whoever, they were like you and I. They just made enlightened activity part of their daily lives. What is enlightened activity is, again, who am I in relation to what is happening? How can I reduce suffering? How can I eliminate the causes of anguish? And so what does that look like in my life? It took many different forms, from working at nonprofits to writing this book to giving talks at high schools. And then all of a sudden I'm speaking at maximum security prisons. Wow. And all of a sudden I'm speaking at corporations and churches. And I've never signed up for any of it. I never even sat down and said, I'm going to write a book. Literally, my friend one day told me, these emails you've been sending us for the last 8 years every month, you need to put them in a book and publish them. And I thought, who would want to read that? And she said, that's not for you to decide. Oh. So it felt like a calling, like a dare. And I did it. And it took on a life of its own. And sure enough, she was absolutely right. The messages that have enriched my life that I thought simply sharing with my close group of friends was sufficient, she had the idea, if we benefit from it, your friends do, what if someone else could? What harm could there be by sharing it? And I didn't contact a publisher. I literally just kind of uploaded a PDF online and it took off. And so my commitment, because I've learned to live off very, very little, is any money the book makes goes right back to the book. I don't benefit or profit from it in any way whatsoever. I don't need it. I'm not doing it for that purpose. So the books to prisons and schools and juvenile program, all of that, that's my commitment. Because again, money comes in. Okay, who am I in relation to that money? Well, I can't consider myself generous if I just keep it. So who I am is someone who gives it right back. So it's this cyclical relationship with everything and everyone around me. Does that make sense? Or does that just too ambiguous?
No, it's not ambiguous at all. Yeah. I think it goes in line. I've come to a place where, at least in my teachings or what I try to believe and try to live out, is like, I always struggle with, like, what is the purpose? What is my purpose? And I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of months about this, and I think we overcomplicate it. I was talking to my daughter the other day, and she says, well, how do I figure out what I'm going to do? And I'm like, really the only universal obligation I feel, the purpose, it's pretty easy, is to make the place better than you found it, right? And if that's the overarching purpose, now there's a lot of activities I can do that fit under that purpose, right? And so it's the difference between saying, right, what causes a lot of this internal conflict or struggle that you're talking about is like everybody's culturally is trying to achieve a true north, which is impossible to achieve. And what I'm hearing you say is like we're kind of generally heading north is what we should be doing. And if you identify those values that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, if I know what those are, then I could be going a little bit northeast, a little bit northwest, and I'm following things that I'm drawn to. And as long as I know what the overarching purpose is to make the place better than I found it, then you can kind of...
While understanding, just to point out, that your definition of better is very different. In fact, might be the opposite of someone else's definition of better. So it's not about proving to someone else or trying to get anyone else, but just who am I in relation to that, and allowing that the opposite of what I know is also true to somebody else somewhere else because of their time, place, and circumstance.
Yeah,
I can't control what they're doing, but can I live? Because, this idea of true north or the truth with that people, if you believe in an ultimate truth, notice how conveniently enough it's your own. And so the idea is that there are many truths out there. Yours is one, somebody else's is another. And as long as we individually live in line with our truth, depending on our time, place, and circumstance, I think we're heading in the right direction. We're eliminating the conflict. We're one more peaceful person in the world. That's huge.
It's way huge, right? I don't know. I think what I was coming up with was kind of in alignment with what you're thinking, right? In the Buddha, like, isn't that right? I mean, maybe I'm more Buddhist than I thought.
But again, Buddhism is such a, wide brush stroke,
right.
And some people think it's a religion, and some people will argue till they're blue in the face that it is. But where I come from, Buddhism is like yoga. Anyone can practice it. It's just it's like, you could be Jewish and practicing Buddhism. You can be Catholic and practicing Buddhism. It's a level of awareness of your part in the whole. And the moment you're in tune with that, there is no us and them. It's us. We're all in this, and I love that unity. I love that connection with, and I'm not just talking about other people, but with everything and everyone around us. And it's really, so you would say that would be an enlightened activity, realizing that I'm connected to everything. The opposite of an enlightened activity of mindfulness is mindlessness. Just eating what we want because it tastes good, completely mindless of, well, what harm is it causing down the line? I'm not worried about that. I just want to get something that tastes good, or, you know what I mean? Or just drink something that makes me feel good right now, but is overall contributing to my detriment, So this whole idea of creating our own suffering, you can follow it, really far. And it all always points back to you. What are you doing to yourself, with yourself, that's either beneficial or detrimental? And that's plenty to do on right there. We're so busy trying to fix other people. It's like, there's plenty of work right here.
Right. That's so true. What's the starting point if we find ourselves, I do think once you get to the self-awareness piece, you turn up the volume and you start kind of listening to the limiting beliefs, the negative self-talk, the anti-talk, the trying to fix somebody else. And that can be jarring when you turn up the volume, right? Because it's happening a lot, and sometimes we're just immune to it. And then when you turn up the volume, it can be kind of shocking, I think. It was for me when I started getting more mindful of or self-aware. I think that's to me, I've always said, I'm just throwing a number out there, that's 80% of the battle. And then the other 20% is where the real hard work comes in, right? And so I say 80% because it gives me, oh, see, I'm almost there, but I don't know if that's true or not. And I know that Pareto principle, that other 20% can be a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, but to me, that's where I start. And I kind of want to see what you guys think about that. At a starting point, then what do we do next? I mean, now we recognize we're kind of in this inner struggle or this inner conflict. What do we do next once we recognize it?
Well, once we recognize it too, we become more aware of everyone else doing it too, right? And that's usually the first exit off the path that we are so inclined to take is, oh, I saw the light. Now I need to take the exit and help others see the light. And I'm like, no, just be the light. Just keep doing your thing. Those who are ready to come out of the dark will come towards you. But if you push your beliefs, what you found, what you've discovered onto someone else before they are ready, just like if someone tried to do that to you before you were ready, you're literally pushing them away. You can't give by throwing. So just be. And what's next is just be open and receptive and allow and surrender to whatever comes next and say, okay, now who am I in relation to that? I can't stress that enough, that it's moment by moment, step by step. And there's no, I shy away from that 80-20, percent, because that implies there's a point of 100% of arrived.
Right, yeah.
And I don't think
20% lasts forever.
That's right.
like literally.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And that feels really good to me, not because, I'm tricking myself to believing I'm almost there, but at least acknowledging, celebrating, I'm on the path. Yeah. That's the hard part, is just getting and staying on the path. Right. No matter where it goes, no matter what, just I'm on it, because it's so easy to get off of it. There are exits every 3 seconds with flashing lights, with really alluring, tempting, decisions that I can make that will take me off my path. Luckily, at any moment, we can return back to the path. And that's the practice. Just like in meditation, when they tell you, count your breaths, when you get to 10, go back to 1. And if you've ever tried it, the first few times, you're counting and you get to 9, 10, 11, 12. You get to 27 before you go, oh man, I was supposed to go back to 1. That's all right. The moment you catch yourself, you go back to 1. Same thing with living a life on the path, is you're making a commitment, you're making your values, and then somewhere you go, shoot, I took that exit and now I'm off my path. That's okay, because your path is programmed as your home button on your GPS. Just click home and recalculate, get back on the path, keep going. There's no sense in beating yourself up about it. I am not what has happened in my life. I'm not anything that I've done. I'm who I choose to become today, moment by moment, right now. And that is so liberating, because I'm not carrying so much of the past with me, and I'm not at all concerned with what's ahead. Just right here, right now, what can I do?
Yeah, I love that.
So you're eliminating anxiety, you're eliminating depression, you're eliminating the causes of suffering and anguish. So it's really not about doing anything.
It's about being.
It's by just, being and not doing the things that make it worse. It's like struggle is not a requirement. And we tend to think of the path and the journey as like, oh, I got to climb up this. Like, just don't dig a hole for yourself, and then you won't have anything to crawl out of. And perhaps that's like a really big difference between the Judeo-Christian faith that many of us were raised with and with Buddhism. Because with with Christian belief, you're born a sinner, and the best thing you can hope for is that by the time you die is that you can be forgiven. Whereas with Buddhism, you're born a Buddha. You've simply forgotten. You've got a lot of stuff clouding your vision. You're not seeing clearly. So you're spending your entire life just kind of trying to wipe away the dirt and seeing, I see clearly. So that's like a really big difference about a starting point. And if your core belief is that you're a sinner and that you're a terrible, horrible person, and the best you can hope for is forgiveness, that's the narrative, that's the soundtrack to your life. But if you're like, I'm a Buddha, I just keep making decisions that take me away from Buddhahood, that's really invitational. Like, well, I can make decisions that bring me back. And that's the invitation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Like, it's very empowering because, like you said, and I love the kind of analogy of meditation practice, you're right, because that's why people are like, oh, I can't, because I think people go into it thinking, oh, I should get to this state automatically, and all. Yeah,
where my mind is clear and I have no thoughts. Like, good luck with it. Where did you get that idea, first of all? And so many people come to me telling me that they've tried meditation and like, oh, I can't do it. I'm doing it wrong. I'm like, well, the only reason you feel like you're doing it wrong is at some point someone told you there's a right way to do it. And I've read those books. You have to cross your legs a certain way, and your eyes have to be at a 45-degree angle with your tongue and the roof of your mouth. And it's just like, forget it. Like, of course you feel like you're doing it wrong. But if you're focusing your mind on one thing and one thing only, and you're not allowing it to be distracted, and if it is, you bring it back to what you want to focus on, you're meditating. It could be gardening, it could be painting, and it could be sitting, cross-legged. There's no sense punishing yourself for quote unquote doing it wrong. Just kind of go back, like, who told me there's a right way to do it, and what was their incentive in doing that?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's like you said, it's empowering to get you back on that path, knowing that you have that choice. And again, that's where I said about that awareness piece is so powerful. Like, so you do find yourself off the path. To me, it's like you celebrate that you were aware of that, because that means that means your mind. To me, that's being mindful, and then you're getting back, and that should be a victory instead of.
And it is empowering because when you say the word path, my teacher used to say, well, what do you imagine? What do you envision? Well, you're envisioning an area in the forest from which all obstacles have been removed. That's a path, and we're all on a path. Thing is, when you're there and you're looking at a path through the forest, that's someone else's path. That's why all the obstacles have been removed. Now, you can stay on that path, but it'll take you to where that person went, not necessarily where you want to go or where you need to be. But it is a path with no obstacles. Great, but it may not take you where you want to be. Whereas on your path, when you come across an obstacle, your path is to overcome that obstacle, to learn the tools, the skills to get over that, and will prepare you for the next obstacle. So going back to your earlier question, I was very much on a path. I was on a career path. I was making really good money. I was working in the corporate world. And one day, one of the other paralegals was celebrating her 30-year anniversary at the law firm where I was working 10 years as a paralegal already. And I realized I saw my path. If I don't get out, that's going to be me. 20 years down the road, I'm going to be celebrating 30 years in the cubicle. And it terrified me. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew right there and then what I didn't want. And knowing what we don't want is an equally helpful navigation tool. It's not about, oh, I want to go true north. It's like, I know I don't want to go south.
Right.
So as long as I'm not going in that direction, I'm good. And that is really helpful. As you get along, you're like, okay, I'm sensing now that north is this way. And I know immediately when I'm heading in the wrong direction for me. And that's what's really important is for me. For someone else, 30 years, corporate job, that's their dream come true. Great, do that. I'm not saying we all need to sell everything we own and move to Hawaii. It was great, but clearly I'm not there anymore. That was the right decision at the right, time, place, circumstance. But things change. We have to remain changeable, or we are resisting the one thing that is inevitable, is change. We Buddhism is rooted on the belief that, we can't avoid getting old, getting sick, and dying. And yet we spend our entire life trying to avoid getting old, getting sick, and dying. It's just like, just embrace it, accept it, celebrate every moment. It's so, again, empowering is the word we keep going back to because it gives you so many reasons to celebrate every breath. I can't think of a better way to live.
I love that. And I love, too, how you brought up, I love that, or the path. You're on a path. It's not necessarily the right one. And the obstacle, and sometimes I'm a big believer of that sometimes, like the Stoics talked about that, the obstacle is the way, right? And like when the obstacle is presented, that's the moment that you need to embrace that moment when the obstacle is presented to you, because this is what's molding you and shaping you if you're willing to embrace it, right? Yeah. And then you're going to be something significant of consequence is going to happen on the other side of that, and that should be celebrated. Right?
Yeah, and I think it's preparing you for a larger obstacle down the road. And if you avoid this one, and you're not picking up the tools and the experiences, you're going to need to overcome the bigger one. The bigger one's going to seem insurmountable, and that's where many people feel stuck. And it's like, it's our job, I think. See, if I continue living my life identifying as a student, then everyone and everything will be a lesson and a teacher.
Yeah.
The moment I think to myself that I have the answers, that I know, then I'm overlooking opportunities. So the only thing I know for certain is that I don't know anything for certain. So I don't argue with anyone about anything. I just listen. And it's so, again, it's not just empowering, but it's eye-opening, mind-opening to just be like, and I take it to an extreme. If someone tells me the sky's purple, I don't argue with them. And I don't need to. The blueness of my sky is not jeopardized by how purple they perceive it to be. I just walk away from that experience knowing that to some people, the sky looks purple. how much easier would life be if we just didn't need to prove ourselves right by making someone else wrong, or being superior by making someone else inferior? We're not in a fight with everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't imagine how joyous a life of battle could be, you know?
We need a Buddha president. It would solve so many problems, I think. No, I love that because, I mean, everybody wants to plant flags. Everybody wants to, and I guess that's all ego-driven, right? Anytime you see that kind of behavior, it's coming from a place of lack and scarcity. It's never coming from a place of abundance, right? And when I started looking at other people that way, I'd always fight and try to prove and plant flags. I'm talking in the corporate arena, particularly, or even in my marriage, right? And I'm here to, but if I can just seek to understand or seek to stop planting flags, right?
Yeah. It's not about, it's again, when you do that, it's because you're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to win. And that's all ego.
100% ego, yeah.
And that's why even on the cover of my book, half of me is in the dark, half of me is in the light. Because it's not about destroying the ego. It's not about killing it. It's about making peace with the fact that, yes, there's an ego within me. But there's also this God being within me. This really wise guru who just sits there quietly. And like, he knows what to do, and like, he's not loud and obnoxious and trying to he just sits there and patiently, ever so patient, with no judgment, just like, when you get it, you get it. I'm not in any hurry. I got all the time in the world. So you could sit there and argue with your wife, but is that really the kind of relationship you want to have? Or I always tell couples, when you argue, do it holding hands. That way you're both on the same side of the couch, holding hands. It's the two of you versus a problem, as opposed to each on the opposite side of the couch making the other person the problem. Right. You're not going to reach a resolution that way. You got married. You're together as a team. Be a team, and it's not you the problem or me the problem. It's there's a problem. Let's solve it together. Gosh, we can accomplish so much more together than we can when we're planting flags, as you say.
Yeah. I love it. Well, what's next for you as you kind of, I know you're probably seeing what you're being drawn to and kind of seeing where it takes you, but do you have kind of, where are you being drawn to right now?
It's funny because when I wrote the first book, everyone's like, well, when's your second one coming? I'm like, there's no second one. I said everything I needed to say in the first book. It's all there. Right. Be kind. What else do I need to say? Right. And then I went on tour for 3 years, just sleeping on a different couch every night. And I was asked so many questions about, okay, well, the book is great, but how did you get there?
Right.
And so when that was done, I needed a timeout, and I moved into a little cabin in the East Sierras. And that's where I thought, well, what if I just answer all of those questions in what is a second book? And so I wrote a second book, and that, went on tour with that, and that answered a whole lot of questions. But it brought up this other idea. Like, I kept being interviewed for podcasts like this. And one day, someone in Australia was interviewing me, and at the end they said, why don't you have your own podcast? And I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to start. I don't even listen to podcasts, let alone know how to create one. Or it was just such a foreign concept. And they walked me through it. We literally did a screen share. They told me which microphone to get and how to record. And I started doing this in audio format, because I realized the books are going to reach some people. The podcast is going to reach another. When I visit your city and give a talk at your local church, that's going to reach a different audience. Instagram reaches a different audience. Facebook is, YouTube, each one. So then I created the Buddhist Boot Camp podcast, and now it's with an editor to go through all of it and compile it into what would be. It's funny to say it, a third book from the guy who said one was enough. But the idea is, if it's there and there's demand and there's request, and the book is doing, I can't explain it enough. The book itself is doing so much good in the world. It became required reading in certain high schools across the country. It's in all the prisons across the country. And it's not me doing it. That's what's so wonderful about it, is I just kind of breathe life into it, and then it just takes a life of its own. And other people drive it forward. So my job, to answer your question, what is next for me, is to say yes. When I'm invited to do an interview like this, I say, okay, and when I'm invited to do another book, it's, as long as it's in line with my values, Absolutely. The moment I'm invited to speak at some, elitist retreat where people pay $5,000 to go and they want me to be a guest speaker, I will say absolutely not, because that is not in line with my values. That is not something I would even go to. And my stuff needs to be available and free for everyone. So thank you. I appreciate the invitation, but that's not for me. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah,
that's
perfect sense.
that's why the values are so important. Even if they're like, we'll pay you this much money. I'm like, I'm not doing this for the money. Like, nothing is going to make me go against my core values, because if it does, I'm creating conflict within me, and then I'm living at war with myself. And then I'm not walking the talk. I'm being the hypocrite that I'm trying to get everyone to not be. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how to answer that, but check in with me in a year and I'll tell you what happened.
Well, I think you did answer it. Answered it beautifully.
Yes,
I mean, it kind of goes with that thing about that vision. I'm a visual guy for that upside down. And I had this conversation with this guy named Lance Tanaka, and he showed me that visual, and he's talking kind of what you talked about. Like, if here you're at the kind of an upside down pyramid, if you will, and you're at that point at the bottom, and inside that pyramid are those values that you're talking about, and that should be the kind of litmus test or road litmus test that'll start laying the pavement down to the road path. That's generally north. It's not, you know what I mean? And you just kind of go where you're drawn, and
a lot of it is driven by faith and trust.
Absolutely.
Trusting that it's. I made the commitment. It's like, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
And it may be uncomfortable. It may take me to places where I never thought I'd be, but this is where I am right now, and it's all temporary. So that's what's so beautiful about it. It's like, we talk about a third book and a tour. It's like, I may not be here tomorrow.
Right.
So, and I'm okay with that too. It's all there. It's just, if I wake up tomorrow morning, that means there's still purpose, there's still a reason, and it's not just for me, but maybe to be there for someone else, then okay, show me the way. And it's so far so good.
And we both have guest bedrooms. You have a guest bedroom?
Do I? Yeah.
Because I don't think you should have to sleep on the couch all the damn time.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, if you come to Wichita, Kansas, we're going to get you an actual bed.
Wow.
You do not have
Fancy.
to sleep on the couch. I guarantee you that.
Because that's how I do the math in my head. Why stay in a hotel?
Right, of
I
course.
do the math in my head.
It's more
and
fun.
how many books for prisons?
Right, yeah.
I work closely with the Prison Library Project. If I'm going to do a plug for anything, go to their website, Prison Library Project. They need funds to get dictionaries into prisons. That's how inmates can get their GEDs. Right. And there are very weird, strange rules that you cannot send a used dictionary to a prison. It has to be brand new. So it has to come from the Prison Library Project. They are solely 100% a nonprofit, relying heavily on people just contributing to make this possible. And so even through my site, every time you buy a book, another one is donated to the Prison Library Project. That's my commitment. That's my vow. And yeah, so why would I stay in a hotel when in my mind I'm like, that could buy X number of books, and help this number of people. Like, I just can't. I don't know. I sleep much more peacefully on an uncomfortable couch than I would in a suite at a hotel, if that makes sense.
We're going to give you a bed. I'm going to upgrade that. I'm not,
I won't say no. I will say thank you so much.
No guest in my home is going to sleep on the couch or the floor. We're going to sleep in a comfy bed. So yes, when you come to Wichita, you've got a place to stay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Timber, you're amazing. Did we talk about everything we wanted to talk about? I'm sure we could go further, but is there anything pressing that we didn't cover that we need the world to hear at this moment?
I don't know. People hear the message they are ready to hear when they're ready to hear it. So I don't think it's up to us to decide.
So where do they hear more of your message?
How can they connect with you?
Yeah, and it's, I really shy away from calling it my message. It's an ancient teaching. I just translate it to a language that people today can understand. And so if podcasts are your thing, the Buddhist Boot Camp podcast is available everywhere that podcasts are hosted, including if you need closed captioning. All the podcasts are available captioned for those who are hearing impaired on YouTube. But BuddhistBootCamp.com or TimberHawkeye.com. Both go to the same place. Links to videos and the books, to prisons, recommended reading. A lot of this stuff, it's all, there's just, if Instagram's your thing, if Facebook, it's all there. My intention is to meet people where they are, rather than force people to get the book. Like, no, do the audio if you prefer the audio. You know what I mean? Just trying to not get in my own way and be rigid or insistent that it has to be done one way. There are many paths up this mountain. Just keep climbing.
I love it. Timber, thanks for coming on the show. It was really enlightening.
Thank you for inviting me.
I use that word, but it was. I mean, I really appreciate you. I'm a better person because I spent this time with you.
Yes,
so thank you.
As you do new projects and release new stuff, certainly come back on. We'd love to have you back on and talk about where you're at. Like you said, in a year, we would love to have you back on and talk about what happened last year and what's in your front windshield and what's in the rearview mirror. So,
thank you.
Thanks, Timber. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids, let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.